guys. Good to see you all. As Micah said, I have the privilege of getting to lead Chi Alpha at Northeastern State. Chi Alpha is an arm of the Assemblies of God on the college campus, and it's really the coolest job in the whole world. Maybe a lot of people say that, but I really believe it. I can't wait for Monday. I just get to hang out with students and share with them, and I get more from them than they probably get from me. I wanted to point out my wife while I'm here. Shayla, will you stand up for just a second? Yeah. She's a special ed teacher at Tahlequah Middle School, and she coaches. She really just does it all. She disciples students in our ministry. She's go all the time. And she's going to have to take a break because that baby's due in December. So at some point, she's going to have to slow down. So if I talk about you in the message, did I say I have an incredible wife? Okay. Oh, yeah. So if I say something, if we tell a story or something, just remember, you're incredible. I get to work with the best people. Jason Watterson, the bearded one on stage. Yeah, he's full-time with Chi Alpha as well, and it's awesome to get to go to work with you every day. His wife, Alyssa, she teaches at OK now. I guess that's okay. And she does an incredible job in our ministry. It is the best job in the world. What Chi Alpha looks like on a practical basis is we have small groups. We disciple students to disciple students, so we have 7 small groups that meet throughout the week. We do a large worship service on campus. We do outreaches on campus. We try to really meet students where they're at. Sometimes we do kind of hokey outreaches, sometimes a little whatever it takes to engage people. I just kind of remember that Jesus loves students more than I do. And so we got to put ourselves out there to engage with people. One of those outreaches we do is it's called the free conversation table. And you say, what's the free conversation table? What are you giving away? And we're just like, well, we're just giving away a conversation. And it's so funny to try to explain that to somebody. It's like, well, what's the gimmick? Who are you with? What's the deal? I'm like, I just want to talk to you, man. Free conversation. The other day, a girl comes up and she goes, I don't think your group would accept me. And I said, try me, And she goes, well, I'm a pagan witch. And I didn't know what to say, so I just said, that's cool. And if you're here today and you're a pagan witch, I still don't know what to say, but that's cool, I guess. It's a fun job, It's really the best thing. Another part of my job is I try to meet with as many students as I possibly can in a one-on-one type of discipleship environment. So, I probably get 10 or 11 of those a week. It's a lot of coffee, and it keeps me going because I just can't. I'm trying to bottle that essence that Micah has. If I could just have a little bit of that in the morning, but I just haven't found that brand of coffee yet. But when I sit down with students throughout the week, we'll talk about relationships. We'll talk about having a devotional life. But more often than not, I'll hear kind of tragic stories about what was done to them, stories about neglect and abuse, manipulation, heavy anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And I don't by any means think I'm a counselor. And so sometimes, I refer people that way. But just there's a certain type of ministry about just being with somebody in the dirt. Just listening to their story and being there with them. And I love getting to do that. That's the best part of my job, is just getting to be there with someone as they go through things. And as we talk about a lot of different stuff to walk through, but probably the number one discipleship thing we go over is dealing with unforgiveness. Dealing with unforgiveness. And I don't think it's just a college problem. I think it's an everyone problem, that we all have gotten hurt, that we all experience things in life, and we all have to walk through that forgiveness journey with people. Before I had the best job in the world, I did a few different things. In a different life, I was the financial aid director on a different campus. I was an accountant for a while. I have an accounting degree. And one day, when I was in the accounting office, I came in late, and some things had been turned over to the auditor that I was supposed to look at that I never got a chance to look at. And I wondered what happened. How could that get turned over without my permission? And then I kind of let it kind of, slip my mind for a little while. And I went to the gym after work. And crazy stuff happens in the gym after work, I know it doesn't look like I go to the gym, but I try to go to the gym. And so I was in the gym after work, and the secretary was on the elliptical next to me. It's always dangerous when you're next to the secretary for the vice president. You never know what you're going to hear. And she said, "You'll never guess what your boss did today." And then there was something just in my spirit. Is it a Star Trek meme that says, "It's a trap"? Yeah, there was something in me that was just, this is a trap. This is bad, but I was not obedient to God, and I didn't push that moment off or get off the elliptical. I listened. And she goes, "You'll never guess what your boss did to you today." And what I feared, what I thought, what the worst case scenario in my mind was actually what had come to pass. That my boss had purposely turned stuff over to this outside entity, putting the company at risk in order to make me look bad and possibly cost me my job. A boss that was my friend, that I stood up for over and over and over again, had turned me over, and I was hurt, I was upset, I didn't know what to do with those feelings, but I heard that check in my spirit, just let it go. Just let it go. Just forgive in the moment. It doesn't mean that the feeling is going to go away, but what am I supposed to do with this, God? It was just let it go. But did I listen to God? I probably wouldn't be telling the story if I did. I didn't listen to God. And I felt like I wasn't supposed to talk about it with anybody. But I was like, just for personal protection reasons, maybe I should talk about it with some Christian friends. There's wisdom found in many counselors. Even though I had a word from God, even though I had direction from God, I didn't listen. And I called some Christian friends, even my mom, and I shared my story from my perspective. And did you know that nobody told me to forgive? None of my Christian friends mentioned anything about forgiveness. None of them mentioned anything about seeking God's will. None of them mentioned anything about obedience. What they did was push on that righteous indignation thing that I was feeling. And I'm not going to say they had bad motives or anything like that. It's what many of us would do. But I just felt more and more wronged, more and more justified in my anger, more and more hurt, more and more like, yeah, I got to stand up for myself, even though God had told me not to do that. And so I set up a confrontation. And I went, because I always feel like I can talk. One of my weaknesses is I feel like I can talk my way out of anything. I'm like, I can get in a moment and I can work it out. And so I sat there alone with my boss, and I said, I know what you did. And I brought up what had happened. I couldn't throw the secretary under the bus, so it made it really weird about how do I know what you did. And she just lied to my face. And she told me it didn't happen. And I ended up having to leave that conversation and apologize to her and her still be my boss. I made it so much worse by not obeying God. And I opened a door in my heart for bitterness, for hurt, for being misunderstood. I opened a door for the enemy to step in and make me really miserable. And that's what we do so many times when these things, because offense will come. Jesus says that offense will come. We can't avoid it. The things are going to happen. One author said, he's called it Christians in the age of outrage. There's so many things to be upset about. There's so many things that hurt us. There's always going to be offense. And you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. And I believe that bitterness is one of the main enemies that goes unchecked in the church. And I don't think anyone's immune, from pastors to deacons to the children. No one's immune from bitterness. And it becomes such a part of us that we don't even think to check it. We don't even think to get rid of it. We become more and more justified in how we feel as time goes on. It becomes more and more a part of us. And because it's so like, man, that happened to you. You deserve to feel this way. I feel so bad for you. Because we're victims, it's hard to let it go. It's hard to let it go. Whether it's divorce or abuse or a parent's divorce. I talk to students who tell me that their parents got divorced and told them it was their fault. How horrible. You know, people say stuff behind your back. They try to get you fired. People leave you that should have stayed by your side. And people happen to us. And even if you could get under the microscope and find some kind of blame to blame yourself, because some of us were self-blamers, the truth is life happened to us. People happen to us, and we're left to pick up the pieces. You ever feel like that? The stuff happens, and you're left to pick up the pieces. What do I do now? How do I not stay the victim for the rest of my life when it feels so justified to be the victim? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31. It says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Yeah. So Paul says, get rid of it. When you got that anger, you got that bitterness, he says, get rid of it. Anybody here hate spiders? Yeah. Yeah. So like my mom watched this arachnophobia movie with me when I was a kid, and I'm all sorts of messed up when it comes to spiders. I hate spiders so much. I hate them. I was in India recently, and there were some huge spiders in India. And we were in the mountains, and they gave us these places to stay that weren't super secure to the outside world. And one night, one of the girls came and knocked on my door and said, "There's some spiders in our room. Could you come and kill it?" And I was the oldest, and I know that Mark Batterson wrote a book one time called Play the Man. And so I said, I'm going to play the man. I'm afraid of spiders, but you know what it's like to play the man. So I was like, okay. And then I get in there to their room, and there's 3 huge tarantulas on the wall, and they all have egg sacs. And these weren't like normal tarantulas. These were like super fast tarantulas. Like they jumped and all that. It wasn't like it was bad. And they were all above my head, so it was going to take all of my tennis abilities to jump up and nail it. And if I didn't hit it right, it might come back in my face. But I vanquished my foe. I mean, because I can't imagine. It's hard to sleep sometimes when there's a little spider in your room, but when there's 3 tarantulas with egg sacs that you can see, yeah, you got to get rid of those things. I so hate spiders that there's a door in our house, like that goes outside, and there's this huge like Charlotte's Web thing, and this big spider in the middle. It's like a Lord of the Rings size spider, and it's so taken over that we just don't use that door anymore. We just don't use it, and so imagine that hatred that we have for spiders. And then what do you do when you walk into a spider web? You ever do that? When you just walk into a huge one, you don't know what you just, oh my goodness. It's like stop, drop, and roll. There's a certain type of tenacity that you have to get that off of you because it just doesn't feel right. And Paul says, when he says, get rid of bitterness, get rid of anger, get rid of slander, get rid of all that stuff, that it's that same kind of tenacity that we cannot let that stuff stay in us. It's like walking into a spider web. John Bevere, in a book, The Bait of Satan, it's a trap. Offense is a trap. And when we walk into it, we got to get out of it as quick as we possibly can, because the consequences are dangerous. But Paul, when Paul writes this, we kind of ask, like, Paul, but you don't know my story. Paul, you don't know what I had to go through. When Paul writes this in Ephesians, he's kind of writing it from a prison cell, but no comparison to Paul's life. But he says, no matter how big the offense was, no matter how unjust or unfair, he says that we can't allow it to go unchecked in our spirit. We cannot allow anger, hate, jealousy, bitterness. We can't allow that stuff to just do unlimited havoc in our spirit, because that's what it does. Bitterness will warp how you see the world. It's like a virus. It frames how we see everything. It becomes a new lens to how we view everything. And I think there's some people today that God wants to give a new lens, a gospel-centered lens on how you view your life story. But it's like a virus, one cut, and left unchecked, undealt with, and you're infected. And it seeks to take over everything. Have you ever met somebody with a chip on your shoulder? Chip on their shoulder? You ever said, hey, you got a chip on your shoulder? Sometimes we think about it with athletes. Baker Mayfield or Michael Jordan had a big-time chip on his shoulder. He would invent stories about how he was slighted, and he would use that as motivation. He would lie to himself about how bad it was for him to convince himself to be more competitive. And people that have chips on their shoulder, that have been able to use anger, resentment, slights to fuel them, they may make it very far in life, but they're miserable to live with. Miserable. Have you ever met someone that said, I'll never be like my parents? I'll never do what my parents did, and then they end up doing the same things that their parents did. They end up doing the same things. It might be in a little bit different way or a little bit skewed different way, but they do the same things to their kids. You know what I'm saying? Like that happened to them because they can't see a different way. Because what happened to them so shapes how they view the world. If we leave those things unchecked in our heart, it so skews us that we will repeat the same things. We will do to others what happened to us. We'll never get through it if we don't do something about it. Bitterness and anger cannot be used to accomplish anything good. It will always infect, and it will always become a part of you. And you'll think that you're in control, but it always is. You find yourself saying unthinkable things and justifying it. Thinking unthinkable things. We find ourselves where we have blood relatives, people we grew up with, and we don't talk to them for years. And bitterness is always justified. It always feels justified. We always have a reason why not to deal with it, why it's someone else's fault. It always has this, because it controls us. It's a part of us. Marriage is a good illustration. Have you ever said something to your spouse that just could not believe that came out of your mouth? Have you ever said something just like, it's because you guys you're with each other all the time. They get the worst and the best part of you. They hear, when everything's done, they get it all. I've said things to my spouse that I could not believe. And we have the most stupid arguments, don't we? We don't even remember what they're about, but we feel so much anger in the moment. If you're honest, you even hated your spouse in the moment. You hated them. One time, can I slip one more story in there? You guys know? One time, we were arguing about something. It was stupid. Who knows what it was about? I said some things. Shayla said some things. And she walks, she leaves the house for a while to cool down. And she drives off, and she's crying. And she parks somewhere. And she's telling me this story later. She parks somewhere, and she's crying. And a police officer pulls up to her car, says, "Are you okay, miss?" And so she's like, "Yeah, I just had a fight with my husband." "Where do you live?" And I've been noticing, cops driving by the house. But anger, bitterness, those things unchecked in our hearts, they'll take us places we never imagined going. They become the lens in which we see everything. I don't mean to minimalize your pain in any way. Those things that happened to you, they really did happen to you and they weren't right. What you felt, it's real. But Jesus doesn't want us to live like this. He doesn't want us to continue on like this. So what's the solution? What can we do about it? Matthew chapter 28, this is kind of where we're going to land today, is in Matthew 28. My Bible's kind of struggling. Matthew 18. I'm sorry to confuse the people that I tell the verses to. Matthew 18, verse 21. Just checking with you, making sure. Sorry, guys. It says, "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times?' Jesus answered, 'I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Peter goes up to Jesus and he's like, see, the rule was, the rabbinical rule was 3 times. And Peter's like, he goes up to Jesus and he's like, I've been watching James and John and they've been kind of sucking up to Jesus. And I know I'm going to get him this time. And he says, how many times should I forgive someone that sins against me? 7 times? Double the rule plus 1? I'm sure Jesus will like that. And Jesus looked at Peter and says, no, 77 times. As many times as it could happen. As many times as you could be offended. He says, forgive. And then Jesus goes on. He says, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and he began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. But he refused. And instead he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. And then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. A couple things I noticed in the story is the man was forgiven 10,000 talents. A talent was worth 6,000 denarii. And a denarii was like an average day's wages. And so a talent could be worth about $400,000 in today's money. It's different, but equivalent. It could be worth about $400,000. And so 10,000 talents. So the guy that blew the money, the guy that owed the money, it could be as much as $4 billion. It doesn't matter if we're exactly right on the scale, but you can see a huge amount of money, $4 billion. And that king cancels that debt. And then the other guy owes him just 100 denarii, 100 days' wages, maybe $10,000. If you look at what an average day's minimum wage, and so maybe $10,000. He'd been forgiven $4 billion, but he wrung the neck of someone that owed $10,000. You see, you hear this, you say, I get it, we're supposed to forgive, but how do we really do it? How do we really do it? And I say, notice the king in the story. Notice the king. You see, often parables aren't complete. We try to read everything into a parable. We'll write books about a parable. And we try to think that every little thing means something little. But no matter how we look at this parable, you see that the king forgave the debt. And the king of the universe, King Jesus, paid your debt. He paid your debt. And I think about how many times have I spit in his face? How many times have I betrayed him? How many times have I let God down? And Jesus says that if I don't forgive, or if I'm struggling to forgive, or if I can't forgive that person in my life, I'm like that servant. I am that servant that was forgiven $4 billion and couldn't forgive 10,000. That's me. We like to talk about the church down the road, but it's me. It's me that struggles to forgive. It's probably you. How many times have we spit in his face? The Gospels are full of real stories about real people who did real things to Jesus. They crucified him. They asked for Barabbas instead of him. But we do the same. Paul called himself the chief of sinners. The chief of sinners. I don't think it was because Paul literally thought he was the leader of the sinners. I don't think that he empirically thought, well, I am worse than every single person in the whole world. I don't think he thought that. But what he did know was he knew his own heart. And when you look at somebody else that's hurt you, you have some surface level knowledge about how they've hurt you. But you have an intimate heart knowledge, everyday knowledge about how you've hurt Jesus. You know every little detail, every negative thought, every nasty thing that you've done to him, and every time you spit in his face. And he forgave us. That though we were like those people that put him on the cross, he hung on the cross and he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. That he has that kind of love and forgiveness, that it says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That he has that kind of love and forgiveness. And when you're saying, how do I forgive someone else? How do I, after what they did to me, how can I let it go? And it's from that new tank that he gives us, that forgiven people can forgive people. Yes, hurt people hurt people. But forgiven people forgive people. And to the level that you can receive him, to the level that you can know that your debt was paid, is to the level that you can empathize and forgive someone else's debt. Because unforgiveness is a debt. If I'm closing, if the band wants to come up, that would be cool. Or even if you don't want to, that'd be awesome. You never know. I get the microphone today. But unforgiveness is a debt. At the end of the day, when we hold unforgiveness against somebody, we hold a debt against someone else. And the things that have been done to you may be horrible. And what can make up for it? If your childhood was taken away because of how somebody treated you, or if your innocence was lost, who could write that check? And if it could be written, what would it give? Nothing. It can't be made up. So there's a debt that we hold against someone else, and it might be monumental. And forgiveness isn't just forgetting about it and pretending it didn't happen. Forgiveness is staring the debt in the face. It's quantifying it if at all possible. And saying, because of what Jesus has done for me, you don't owe me anymore. Even just saying it out loud, it kind of shocked me. Like, you don't owe me. Even if you could, you don't owe me anymore. I don't expect anything back from you. That's what it is. It's a debt being released. You don't owe me anymore. The power comes from Him. And the doctrine of heaven is that one day He's going to make it right, every bit of it right someday. That even the worst things that ever happened to us will be but a memory. There'll be just one little bit. That's the doctrine. That's what we believe in. That the worst day of your life, the worst season of your life, will be just a blip. And what you get to do today, if you would open your heart to Him and you would release that debt, what you get to do today is be part of the King reconciling the world to Himself. That you get to release some of that healing power. Because hurt people hurt people. Forgiven people forgive people. And healed people heal people. And you get to be part of it. It doesn't mean the feeling is going to go away. It doesn't mean it's going to stop right away. But when that feeling comes and you go, ugh, you look back at what you did today, or what you're going to do in a couple minutes, and you say, that day, I made a decision to cancel all that debt. I made a decision to say, they don't owe me anymore. Would an apology be nice? Absolutely. You can't that's how reconciliation happens. You can't control that. But if we were dependent on someone else, then we wouldn't have any power. But Jesus gives us the power to forgive, even when they're not empathetic, even when they're not sorry. This is the hard stuff. This is the hard stuff. You thought when you came to this Assemblies of God church today that like healing the dead, healing the sick, raising the dead, casting out demons, you thought that was the hard stuff? No. The disciples didn't bat an eye when they got asked to do that. But if you look, there's an account in Luke. And Jesus told them to forgive. And they said, increase our faith, Lord. Increase our faith. Because that's the hard stuff. That's the hard stuff. So as we close, I've heard it said that we mature physically according to time, but we mature spiritually according to our obedience. At the end of the day, no matter how bad it was, this is an obedience thing. And I know when you look at what someone did to you, I wouldn't blame you for saying, I can't. But Jesus says that you can. And if He said it, I can do it. And I can look at it and release the debt. And it won't be at the end of the day that you can. It will be that you won't. But I believe He'll empower you to take that step today. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up. If you're on the prayer team, I didn't prep you for this either, because again, I think this is a holy moment. I think this is a real thing. Like that there's people in here that you've been holding on to stuff for a long time. And today's the day where you get to release that debt. So I think there's 3 people that can respond to this. 1, you walked in here today, and even as you tried to raise your hands to God, you knew there was something wrong with someone else, that there's a relationship that's wrong, and you need to make it right. Jesus said in Matthew 5 that before you offer your sacrifice, go make it right with your neighbor. That you don't need to respond to an altar call. You need to go outside and make a phone call. You need to text a friend and go make it right. Don't offer a sacrifice of praise before you make it right with your neighbor. That's one. It's two, you just need to release a debt today. It's nothing you did, but you need someone to partner with you, and you just want to let it go today. And I'm going to say the third person this is for, then I'm just going to say go, and we're going to pray for people, okay? And if you feel led to pray with somebody else and join them, like join alongside. Because this is a moment. We're not supposed to carry this stuff. So one, you're supposed to make it right. Two, you need to release that debt today. And three, there's a flip side of this. There's somebody in here, there's some people in here that you can't forgive yourself. It's not somebody else, it's you. You can't forgive yourself. See, anger says you owe me, but guilt says I owe me. And in the same principle applies, that you've got to quantify the debt and say, well, Jesus forgave me. And release that debt against yourself and don't pick it up again. All right? Can we respond to that?